I'm Joel Liskowich, and I'm Vice Chair of the Board of the JCRC. On behalf of myself, our Chair, Deborah Price, who is currently traveling in the Middle East with the Governor's Trade Mission, and our entire board, I welcome you to this evening's JCRC Council meeting. As many of you know, our council is comprised of 35 membership-based Jewish organizations, up to 10 at-large members, and up to 18 board members. And our council currently has 60 members. Tonight, we have the opportunity to learn from speakers who are on the front lines of keeping our community safe. With a topic this current and this important, we wanted to open up this conversation to the entire Jewish community. In addition to the approximately 40 people in this room, we have at least 50 people joining us via Zoom tonight. Because of the size of the audience, the Zoom format is in a webinar, so participants will be unable to unmute themselves to ask a question. We do ask those that are joining us online to use the Q&A feature to ask questions, and members of the JCRC staff are monitoring the room to ensure that your questions will be asked. As there is no voting tonight on behalf of the council, we will not hold a roll call, and instead our meeting begins now. As always, our first order of business is to set the tone of learning, reflection, and community. I'd like to call on Executive Director Marit Rory Pickard-Nice to offer some words of Torah. All right.
Thank you, Joel, and good evening, everyone. It's so great to be with you all. So tonight, I want to start us off by sharing one of my favorite stories in the Talmud. And a little bit of a spoiler, if you ever learn with me, you're going to know that every time I introduce it, I say it's one of my favorites, probably because in that moment, it's my favorite. But this is the story of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, two study partners who are notable for the work that they always do together. The story begins with a little bit of background. I don't have it up here, and I'll read it out loud so you can look ahead, but I'll tell you the important parts. But it begins, before we get to this part of the story, we're introduced to Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish, and kind of the fun facts about them. This is completely irrelevant, other than I love that the Talmud wants to tell us. Rabbi Yochanan is incredibly beautiful. Like, they have pages and pages about how beautiful this man is. And Reish Lakish is a robber. He's the head of a gang. And actually they meet each other because he is like so enamored by Rabbi Yochanan from afar that he like swims over to him and says, I've never met somebody more beautiful. And Rabbi Yochanan says, you know, you should use your strength for Torah. And he says, you know, your beauty is wasted. Anyway, they build up this partnership and they start to learn together. And so Rabbi Yochanan teaches Reish Lakish the Bible. He teaches him Mishnah, the oral tradition. He turns him into one of the great sages. One day, the sages of the study hall were engaging in a dispute concerning the following. With regard to the sword, the knife, the dagger, the spear, a hand sickle, and a harvest sickle, from when are they susceptible to ritual impurity? This was a really big deal in the time of the Talmud. During the time of the temple, there was this notion of ritual impurity, and certain objects could become ritually impure. Certain objects could not become ritually impure. And it was very important in terms of when could the priests then touch them before they did the temple service and things like that. And so they needed to know when could these objects become ritually impure, because they could become ritually impure when they were completed, but not when they are incomplete objects. So essentially, so it's from the time of the completion of their manufacture. Okay, and that's the rule for metal objects in general, as it says. Okay, so we go on to the next one. Jennifer is behind the scenes moving this forward for us. Okay, thank you. So now we have the next question, right? So if it's from when they're completed, then we need to know, well, when are these objects actually complete, right? If you've ever made a knife, when have you finished making a knife? Rabbi Yochanan said it's from when one fires these items in the furnace. And Reish Lakish said it's one scours them in water. Okay, this is a really good open debate that they have. And then it turns. Rabbi Yochanan says to Reish Lakish, a bandit knows his banditry. Rabbi Yochanan turns to his friend and says, well, you would know when a knife is finished because you've been in the business of knives. And Reish Lakish turns to Rabbi Yochanan and says, what good did any of this do me? You said you were going to teach me Torah. You said you were going to make me one of the great sages. And what was the point of any of it? When I was there with the bandits, they called me a leader of the bandits. And now here I am among the sages, and you still call me a leader among the bandits. What good was any of this for me? Rabbi Yochanan gives an answer. It's an incredibly unsatisfactory answer. He says, I brought you close to God under the wings of the divine presence, but Reish Lakish is understandably not really satisfied with this because his friend that he thought he had some trust in, it turns out really just thinks of him as a former thief. And so the story continues. Rabbi Yochanan gets offended by this fight, and Reish Lakish is so hurt by it that he falls ill. It makes him sick. And ultimately, Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, which is Reish Lakish's formal name, he dies. Rabbi Yochanan is so pained that he loses his partner. The rabbis say, who is going to go and comfort him? Who will calm his mind? And they send over this rabbi, Rabbi Elazar ben Padat, and they say his statements are sharp. He's a smart guy. He can go and he can work with Rabbi Yochanan. He can be a substitute. So they send over, next, thanks. They send over Rabbi Elazar ben Padat. Rabbi Elazar ben Padat goes and sits before him, and every matter that Rabbi Yochanan would say, Rabbi Elazar ben Padat would say, you're absolutely right. You know, there's a teaching that supports that position. And Rabbi Yochanan got angry. He said, are you like Reish Lakish? The son of Lakish, when I would state a matter, he would raise 24 difficulties against me, and I would answer him with 24 answers, and the halakha, the law by itself, would become broadened and clarified. And you say to me, there's a ruling which is taught that supports your opinion. Don't you think I know that what I say is good already? I love this story for so many reasons. It's going to close ultimately. Rabbi Yochanan, this doesn't have a happy ending to it. He's ultimately going to be so upset by it. He's going to lose his mind wandering around looking for Reish Lakish until the rabbis ultimately pray for mercy on him. But what I think is really noteworthy in this story, there's a few things that we find in it. The first is that Rabbi Yochanan brought somebody into the community who wasn't one of the people that they expected in the community. He brought in someone who had an outside perspective. And in bringing in this outside perspective, we actually got better learning from it. I don't know when you finish making a knife. I've never made one before. For the rabbis who actually wanted to know when does an item become ritually impure, they actually needed this key knowledge that none of them had, because ironically, the rabbis who are the ones engaging in all of this discussion don't usually leave the house of study to actually engage in this world that they're trying to find out about. And they needed Reish Lakish to come in. But more than that, when Rabbi Yochanan says back to Elazar ben Padat, I think is really important for the work that we do here. When he says to him, I don't need people who come and tell me all the reasons why I'm right. I need the people who come in and tell me why I'm wrong. And not because Rabbi Yochanan ultimately finds out that he's wrong. Rabbi Yochanan still concludes the same conclusion that he started with. But it's a better conclusion for having gone through the journey of someone telling him why he needs to fine-tune it. The process of having to grapple with his thinking and having to be challenged by it makes him stronger, not because he necessarily is changed by it, but because the process itself forces him to reflect and to know where he's coming from. And that's what we try to all do here. I know some of you are here as guests tonight and not members of our council regularly, and we welcome you and we're so thrilled to have you. And some of you are here because you come here for all of our council meetings as part of the work that we do at the JCRC. But in all of it, part of our mission is saying that we can only be as strong as all of the opinions that challenge us, and that while we don't necessarily come here thinking that we have to leave here thinking differently than we started, we know that we're going to leave here better for it, for having thought through where we are and where we're going. And so when we engage in these discussions, we're not afraid to be challenged by them. We're not afraid to be who we are boldly and proudly. We're not afraid to question and to push back and to think through, because at the end, wherever we end up, we're going to be closer to whatever that truth is for us, even if it's not the truth for everyone else. And so I thank you all not only for joining us, but I thank you for engaging in that process. I thank you for making the Torah here and in our community stronger, and for honoring this partnership and this love of this relationship that starts off in the story of Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. Thank you.
Rory, thank you. So we will now move into our program this evening, Keeping Our Community Safe. We are thrilled to have 4 speakers join us, 2 in person and 2 via Zoom. Jay Greenberg is the special agent in charge of the FBI St. Louis Division. Scott Biondo is Director of Community Security at the Jewish Federation. Jordan Kadosh is the Regional Director of the ADL Heartland chapter, and Gwen Smith, the Criminal Justice Policy Manager at Empower, Missouri. Each speaker has about 15 minutes. They can decide how long they wish to speak, and the rest of that time will go towards questions, both here in the room and online. Those online can use the chat feature for Q&A. Our first speaker is Jay Greenberg. In May of this year, he was named Special Agent in Charge of the St. Louis Field Office of the FBI. He most recently served as a Deputy Assistant Director in the Criminal Investigation Division at FBI headquarters in Washington, where he led sections that dealt with financial crimes, public corruption, civil rights, and FBI's covert operations. Mr. Greenberg has had a variety of roles at the FBI, including leading a white-collar crime squad and oversight of an initiative across law enforcement to address a surge in violent crimes. Mr. Greenberg earned a bachelor's degree in industrial engineering from Texas A&M. And prior to joining the FBI, he worked in management and technical consultant. Mr. Greenberg, welcome to St. Louis and welcome to the JCRC. The floor is yours.
Thank you for that very nice introduction, everybody. It is a privilege to be here with you tonight. I'd like to thank JCRC for the opportunity to be here, Federation for hosting, and I'd like to thank the agenda creators as well for letting me go first before Jordan and Scott, so that hopefully I don't have to follow them and their acts. I've never heard Gwen speak before, so very happy to be first here. So out of respect for everybody's time, what I find in discussions with communities, I will prime the pump just a little bit with the FBI's view about hate crimes and civil rights and why they are so important to us and what we're doing about them. But I often find that questions will sort of get to your most important topics within that most quickly. And given that we have a limited time, I will move into questions pretty quickly. So when I was a Deputy Assistant Director, which is a title that is meaningless outside of the FBI in Washington, D.C., it means that I was one of the senior executives helping run the FBI. We realized in the wake of George Floyd that we needed to change something, because if you looked at the outcomes from George Floyd in terms of the cost to the country and the division and the strife and the anger, it was eerily similar to what happened after Rodney King 25 years earlier. And so we have not made the progress in that 25 years as a country that we need to make. So as the lead executive over civil rights for the FBI and for the nation, we elevated how we prioritize civil rights investigations to the highest priority of the organization. It is matched only by a number of the investigations in counterterrorism and public corruption within the criminal sphere. So a little bit about how the FBI is organized. Each one of our major cities has a field office. So St. Louis is our field office for this area. We serve all of Eastern Missouri. So that goes all the way to the border with Iowa, up with Illinois, and then down by Memphis and Arkansas. Really everywhere the judicial district for the Eastern District of Missouri controls, that's where we have agents who investigate a variety of crimes and national security matters. We rank all of our threats. Civil rights is ranked very, very high for us here in St. Louis, as it is with everybody. And what we've done in the last couple of years is really emphasize getting messaging out about civil rights, because we know primarily within the civil rights spectrum for us, hate crimes is really what we're here to talk about, which is any kind of threat or use of violence with a bias motivation. And that bias can be race or religion. What we know is that, here in America, Jews make up about 2.5% of the population, and you account for approximately 62% of the bias motivated crimes or threats where religion is the bias. So it's incredibly outsized. And I think, everybody here is a student of history. We know that in the history of the world, nobody is more beleaguered than the Jewish population has been globally in terms of the bias that this community has faced, regardless where you call home at that time in the world. So what we have are combined forces from our Joint Terrorism Task Force and our civil rights working groups. What we're always trying to do is come out like tonight and encourage communities to report hate crimes or potential hate crimes to us so that we can work with our local partners to investigate those. When I was first assigned as an agent at our Washington field office, when I first joined the organization, I was assigned to work civil rights. I had a lot of successful prosecutions against people with bias motivated violent crimes that they committed, and we got them put in jail for a long time. So this is something that has been a part of my bureau journey since my first day graduating the academy as an agent. It's something I'm very proud to represent here. What we now have identified in the organization is that our counterterrorism teams are very good at using proactive tools and social media to sort of ferret out potential threats, whereas our criminal investigators are very, very good at simply investigating crimes once they have been committed and then bringing people to justice. And what the protection of an entire community requires is a combination of those two things. We have to be eternally vigilant to stand here ready to serve at any time. And then when there is an attack that gets out in front of all of our various tripwires, like people like you reporting what you're seeing and what you're experiencing, then we're here to help make sure that justice follows and that you can trust in the country and the system that we have. So let me pause very briefly and see if there's questions from the room where you would like me to specifically tailor the remaining time that I have.
I do have one that's come in from Q&A.
I will. I'll repeat, sure.
Here, and I can do that. What is the FBI doing in response to the normalization of neo-Nazi activity in our political discourse?
Sure. So the FBI has a tremendous amount of authority and power. None of that authority and power, however, was bestowed upon us to be the thought police for the country, right? You don't want us to use our power to be the thought police, right? We've seen that happen in past countries and regimes, and that's never where you want somebody like the FBI who is sworn to protect your freedoms. So we do not investigate groups, and we do not investigate ideologies. We investigate violent threats or potential attacks. So what we do is, again, never monitoring groups and ideologies, and certainly never policing thought or speech. When speech crosses into something that would be considered a threat under US federal law, that is when we begin our investigation. And frequently in these investigations, we will work with state and local partners to make an arrest very, very quickly and then finish collecting evidence so that we can determine whether a state or local level charge is the right kind of mitigation for somebody particularly violent or particularly vile with their threats, or whether it's better to bring them into the federal system and charge them there. Sometimes we do both. So to answer the question specifically, what one trend I have noticed in our public discourse is, and this is on the internet, it's on the airwaves, it's on every station you can look at, it's a lack of respect for individuals who do not share our current belief set. And so one thing that we could use the nation to do, which is everybody sitting here, is find that middle ground again, where we relearn how to maturely disagree with each other so that we don't continually escalate the dialogue between people until somebody gets incited to act because they are, so unhappy with the kind of discourse that's out there in public.
So in the last years, we've seen a number of lone wolf attacks, people without criminal background, without much ideological reputation. What role do you see for us, anyone else to deal with this?
Great question. The question is, we've seen a rise in lone wolf attacks, often people without criminal histories. And what is the role of everybody who's participating in tonight's discussion really when it comes to that topic? And your role in all of the investigations that I have personally participated in and those that I have reviewed. So a little bit about my prior role for that title that means nothing outside of Washington, D.C. and the FBI Deputy Assistant Director. I was frequently responsible for briefing the director of the FBI and the deputy director every morning in our morning cycle for the notable crimes happening across the nation. So that's a lot of ground to cover, right? But because of that, we reviewed every critical incident where there was a shooter in public, a mass shooting, which is 3 or more people wounded or shot in any incident. And we would review that every single morning. Sometimes it was counterterrorism briefing it, sometimes it was me. In almost none of those instances, when we talked to friends and to family and to doctors and to people connected to them, was there 100% unanimous view that everybody was so surprised. Nobody saw this coming, right? That almost never happened. When we talked to the wife, the ex-wife, the husband, the ex-husband, the kids, the grandparents, the neighbors, the friends, right? The mental health providers, whomever it was, the theme was, we were really worried about him, right? We were worried. We made calls, we called the police out, we asked for help. So your role, everybody who's hearing this tonight, your role is, and there's a reason we say this all the time, we repeat it, if you see something, say something. Okay, thank you. So if you see something, say something. If you believe that there is an imminent threat in a situation, pick up the phone and call police. If you think you have time and you believe that it may be a bias-motivated violent crime, then you can call us. You can call us at 1-800-CALL-FBI. You can call our St. Louis number. You can give us a tip online at fbi.gov. But call somebody and make sure that there is a report. It is with that report that we get the authority to start investigating. And more what we're trying to achieve these days is not necessarily just a prosecution or a mental hold for 24 hours or 96 hours for somebody who might need a little help. We're trying to find different paths that we can help guide people to with mental health resources and with other social services that are available. So that if there's somebody who's feeling disenfranchised or like they don't fit, or the way that they need to fit in and make a name for themselves is to do something horrendous and they'll live forever. We're trying to find them resources outside of just our arrest authority or a local police officer's arrest authority to get that person some services they need. So hopefully they can turn around and become a productive member of society.
Well, if I may follow up, recently, thank you. And went into a school and murdered a number of people and was subsequently killed. But the newspapers have reported that his family made repeated efforts to calling the police. Get his guns removed, get anything. And we all both know that there's very limited mental health resources for people. It's very, very difficult to submits not incarcerate to admit someone to a hospital under involuntarily, and there's just an ungodly proliferation of military style weapons in everyone's hands. It seems to be, I agree with everything you say, but it just doesn't seem we have the resources available to really address this problem.
So obviously, question about Central VPA and the shooting 2 weeks ago that just broke out. I was there on the scene in the morning with Colonel Sack from St. Louis Metro PD. St. Louis Metro saved a lot of lives with their very quick response. So we were as horrible as a couple weeks ago was. It turned out as well as it could have for that situation. In terms of sort of the underlying problems for you that you have well articulated facing us as a nation and as a city and as a state, I will tell you that law enforcement officers like me and like St. Louis Metro PD, our job is to enforce the laws that are on the books. So, different states have different gun laws in terms of who can legally buy and who can legally own guns. There is some controlling federal law. We do our part to make sure that when we run background checks, if there's anything that prohibits a person from purchasing a weapon from a licensed dealer, we will stop that purchase, as we did in this case. However, different states have different laws. And so if you want to see a change in your community, I'm not here to advocate for any one view or any one law. Whatever law is on the books federally, we will enforce. And that is the same holds true with our state and local partners. So if you want to see a change, be the change that you want to see by helping create the environment where you want to live. So, okay. Thank you. Yes, sir. Sure. So one theme that Hollywood got wrong a lot of years ago was that the local police and the federal police don't get along. I will tell you that when I rolled up to the scene at Central VPA 2 weeks ago, and I was there with dozens of federal agents from FBI and ATF who showed up on scene, and hundreds of cops from St. Louis Metro there as part of that. The reason we always say call 911 and get safe, make yourself secure, is that the local police are going to respond. They are experts in physical security and investigating violent crime and bringing stability to an unstable situation. And then we come in there, and my first question to Mike when I walked up, I said, Mike, terrible to be seeing you like this on a Monday. I'm sorry, I know this isn't what either one of us wanted. What can we do to help? What do you have going on? What can my folks do to help? Is there anything? I'm just going to stand here. And if you tell me there's nothing I can do to help, then I'm going to be here to look out for you. And if there's something you want me or my folks to do, we will do it forthwith. And so very quickly, St. Louis Metro took that investigation. They kept the investigation. They ran the investigation well. At different points of that day and in the subsequent weeks, they have asked us, hey, can you help us out with this? Can you help us out with that? And every time our answer has been yes. So it was just as true at Central VPA 2 weeks ago as that is at every other major incident that happens across the nation. We are there in support of the community and in support of the law enforcement community responding to the incident, and part of that community responding to the incident. And regardless of the crime type, or whether it is counterterrorism or various types of crimes, we are always in concert with our local partners, looking at who's got which authorities at which level, which one fits this situation best, and where do we really help work together to keep a community safe. That is always our primary mandate, to protect the American public and uphold the Constitution.
We have time for one more question. Sherry?
Thanks so much for coming. And especially this is we just opened our Holocaust Museum, as I know you know, and talks a lot about anti-Semitism and what you should do, what your role is as a member of the community for hate crimes. I want to ask about militia. You sort of said you don't, Missouri is known for some bad militias. You were not involved at all in watching those. That's the way you said that, as if we don't investigate anything that hasn't had a crime yet. Is that not something that the FBI is following, aware of? Tell me your role there.
Okay, so the question was, is it really true the FBI doesn't investigate militias and that we don't investigate groups? So we have to investigate. To have an investigative mandate, we require a specific threat. So if you are a guy who likes to shoot guns and drink beer in the woods and go out and do that in the Boot Heel part of Missouri, and you can legally possess a gun and you're with friends, that's never something we're going to investigate. If somebody comes and tells us, we believe this group of people is going through paramilitary training and we have heard that they intend to launch a violent attack somewhere, well, now we have a mandate to investigate. And we may investigate that threat everywhere it takes us. But I would never go online. We would never start online and look at a group or a militia of any kind and say, "Ooh, that looks like something we need to investigate." We always need specificity to have legal authority to start our investigations. Sure. So the follow-up question was, wasn't Governor Whitmore's potential kidnapping investigated ahead of time? Absolutely. Every single day. We actually just had a case here last week involving a defendant who made some threats about attacking the community right here locally. And Cody Rush was sentenced last week to 30 months in prison federally, and then he's going to serve a long time in state facilities as well for other crimes. So we're constantly looking for, to be clear, a threat does not have to, it's a violent threat, does not have to have an overt act where there is actually an execution of that threat. A threat to kidnap somebody, a threat to shoot somebody, a threat to attack or stab or burn or terrorize somebody or some group or some facility is enough for us to investigate. We frequently investigate threats and we make arrests before anything happens, before, for instance, the governor gets kidnapped. But what we're not investigating is the militia. What we are investigating is that violent threat. When it's a group, we never investigate groups, but we do investigate co-conspirators, right? So some of this is legal jargon, but we would never start an investigation simply into a militia with a specific name. But if there is an actual threat that comes forward, we will investigate that threat. And out of respect for tonight's agenda, I'm going to go ahead and cap the time. Thank you so much for having me. I'll be here for those of you in the room afterwards for a few minutes as well. Thank you.
Jay, thank you very much. Okay. I'd like to introduce our second speaker, who is no stranger to most of us. As many community events, you see our friend Scott Biondo, Director of Community Security at the Jewish Federation, in the back of the room, always assessing the security situation. Scott has been with the Jewish Federation since 2017. Prior to joining the Federation, he provided investigative and security solutions to businesses and governments for more than 30 years. Scott has held a wide variety of private sector security positions in the healthcare and hospitality industries and public sector positions as a police officer, detective, and detective sergeant. He's a graduate of the Law Enforcement Training Center, has received specialized training from a number of federal agencies, including the Secret Service, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Drug Enforcement Agency, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearm, and the Department of Homeland Security. Lucky to have him supporting our Jewish community. And he is joining us from New Orleans, where he will talk about in a moment. He's attending a Federation security-related conference. Scott, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Joel. Welcome, everybody. I'm very happy that you've all chosen to join us this evening. And as was stated, I actually, ironically, would be there in the room with you, except that I am at a conference in New Orleans. This conference is a conference, a national conference for security directors for the Federation, so across the country. And this is one of the areas that I'll go into a little bit more when I talk about some of the silos that we work in. But the idea of having this national group of individuals that monitor, both monitor threats to the community, but also engage in developing best practices in how to secure the community is just of paramount importance to our Jewish community. We work with these individuals generally on a daily basis. We meet at least weekly, and we share intelligence information. So let's talk a little bit about, what are we actually doing to protect the Jewish community? There are a number of areas that we built when we built the community security program. And by the way, this was something that Federation was actually looking at, the St. Louis Federation, very early on. I believe we are somewhere around the 25th, 26th Federation to have a security director. That number is now over 70 and growing all the time. So St. Louis Federation was very early on engaged and recognized that there was a need to have someone at the helm to basically manage the security posture of the entire community. In my role, my area of responsibility, something we call the AOR, is basically somewhat widespread. It's the St. Louis metropolitan area, but we also take care of and engage with a number of communities outside the metro area, from on the east side, from Paducah, Kentucky, up through southern Illinois into the metro area, and then west of us out through outstate Missouri to include Jefferson City, Columbia, Joplin, Springfield, and our camp that's away from St. Louis in Rocky Mount, Missouri. That's a pretty wide area, but what that allows us to do is it allows us to share information with all of those folks on things that are happening that would be potentially problems for the Jewish community, whether that be trending, some of the things that that people asked questions about to Jay earlier, or passing out information that might be relevant to the community. So I'll talk to you a little bit about the areas that we focus on, our areas of focus. One of them is investigations and intelligence. There are probably multiple people in the room that have at some point sent me information about some type of a communication that they've received. Last year, the St. Louis Federation alone opened up over 200 cases involving things like hate speech, Holocaust denial, anti-Semitism. But many of these things, many of the communications that we receive are not actually, they don't rise to that level, that criminality level, that threat level. Some of them can be veiled. Some of them can be just communication where you sense that something's wrong, you sense that something's unusual about it, but you're not really sure where the individual is going. And we've always encouraged, as part of our program, for that information to be forwarded to us so that we can do a further evaluation. And then how we handle it from there is that, as Jay was saying earlier, we actually focus very heavily on working with our partners outside. So we're considered the private sector, and Jay is the public sector, and our law enforcement partners are in the public sector. And we work daily with our public sector partners. In ways that we do that, for instance, one of the ways is that I serve as an intelligence liaison officer for 3 different fusion centers: Southern Illinois, St. Louis metropolitan area, and outstate Missouri. And this allows us to share information with people that we know it will get to the right people quickly. We work with the FBI, we work with the Joint Terrorism Task Force, and we work with the U.S. Attorney's Eastern District Hate Crimes Task Force. And this allows us to, once again, put out information very, very quickly. One of the other areas that we focus on is physical security, and that's physical security of our organizations, of our locations, some 50 odd in the St. Louis area, some 64 under my umbrella. And we work with them on basically creating environments that we know will mitigate threats. We do this based on information. Jay talked about studying, about looking at these situations that occur where basically in almost 100% None of them occurred without some type of notification or warning. Well, we also learned things about physical security. We also learned things about what works in terms of mitigating the threat. Many times it's something as simple as just a barrier, a door. The attack on the synagogue in Halle, Germany on Yom Kippur was thwarted by a locked door. And you'll hear me say this over and over in our community, where we talk about controlled access and not engaging with people until we've made a determination that they're not a threat. These are all really critical instances or critical scenarios in which we need to be looking at constantly and making corrections as we go. One of the ways that we do that, and I believe Jordan's going to talk a little bit about some initiatives that they're working on with ADL, but one of the ways that we do that is by assisting our local community with the FEMA Homeland Security non-for-profit grant program. And this allows us to receive governmental funds that help us increase the security posture and make enhancements for physical security in our facilities. We work on with every organization in the Jewish community. We engage in projects besides the NSGP. Those projects may be new construction, where we engage with them as a security consultant to ensure that if a building is built, that all the proper security measures are put in place. This is all done to mitigate potential threats. We want to be the person that turns the threat away, that isn't the person that's actually dealing with the threat. If we can turn the threat away, that's the best place to be. If we have to engage with the threat, then we want to have protocols and procedures in place to do that. And one of the ways that we do that is through training for the community. We engage in a significant amount of training throughout the year. Basically, we're doing training with every organization in the St. Louis area. And in some cases, in some years, that's been over 2,000 people a year that we train on things like recognition of suspicious behaviors, de-escalation techniques, situational awareness, and unfortunately, active attacker response. And I feel very confident that the training that we use is very good. It comes from the United States government. It is tried and tested. And when we engage with this training, when we engage in our response by utilizing this training, we can be successful in mitigating these types of incidents that you see around us. We also evaluate our presence in the community. Every single special event that we have in this community is evaluated for potential risk to the event. And that's done through a number of means, but primarily monitoring activities regarding the event. How do we put the event out there into the community? What do we do in terms of providing physical security for the event, and other avenues that we can take to, once again, mitigate threats, keep threats away from the event, keep threats away from the community. These are just a number of things that we do in terms of the community security program. We try to engage with the community as often as possible. We have a number of programs to do that. One is our community security liaison program. I thought I saw some faces in the crowd that are actually a part of that group. That group receives information from us at Community Security so that they can basically distribute that and disseminate that information amongst their organization as they see fit, but also in the best possible manner for those people that need to be use that information as actionable, that they have the information available to them. These are just, once again, these are things that we're doing in the community to keep the community safe. We know that communities have been the victims of attacks, especially in the Jewish community. We're not a stranger to that. And what we want to do is be as proactive as possible. The last thing I want to say, and then I'm going to open it up for questions, is that I cannot tell you how important the comments Jay made about the see something, say something thing are. Almost every scenario that we've had, that we've been able to work with our federal partners, work with our state and local partners on circumventing or are dealing with, or at least investigating until we feel that the situation is benign, was information that came to us from our partners. I'd like to tell you that I can be everywhere at once, but I can't. But guess what? A lot of you can be a lot of different places. and you can provide that information to us about things that you see. And those things can be, very benign. It could be something as simple as a person walking back and forth in front of one of our facilities, which ultimately led to the scenario that Jay also spoke about with the sentencing of Cody Rush this past week. It is just extremely important that we work together to keep our community safe. And I think that's why this opportunity to speak to you, but also this program that JCRC is putting forth is just one of those things that we have to continue to do. We have to do it. We have to do it a lot. We have to get the word out, and we have to be working together all the time to be able to keep this community safe. I'll now stop and open up for questions.
Question in this room.
As I bring the microphone, it's Rory, and I want to say I really appreciate, Scott, thank you for all that you said. And as somebody who has called on Scott repeatedly, it's been great comfort when something just feels wrong and you're not totally sure, being able to just pass it to someone else and say, I don't know if this is creepy, but I trust you to check it out. And so I have done that plenty of times to Scott. Thank you.
I got to work with Scott after the 2017 and put in cameras in all the cemeteries in town, and we appreciate it very much. At UH Synagogue, we put a policeman on the door every Friday night. I go to the J a lot. I walk in the door. I have never seen any kind of security. I don't know if it's passive, active, or what, but I was just curious. I know we have campus security guards riding around in cars, but just walking in the door every time, I don't know. I've been at other J's where they do have policemen at the front, and I don't know, cost prohibitive or what, but it was just something that has always bothered me, and especially in the light of what's been going on lately.
So would you like me to, so let me just address security for locations like the J. So the JCCs do provide an extremely challenging environment, because unlike other locations where we basically can lock the door and control access and vet those persons that visit, the JCC is just the opposite. It is available to the public. It is a location that has beyond Jewish membership. So there are people there that we know, and there are people there that we don't know. And, it is a challenging environment, and it's a balancing act. And I would say that the Jay's administrative team tries every day to do the best job that they can based on this balancing act. It's like anything, if there's competition out there, and the competition often are places that don't have issues maybe that the Jewish community has. And there's a fine line that we walk in terms of, what we do so as to not, look like we're someplace that you actually don't want to work, that you don't want to go and work out, that you don't want to be a member of. And I think the Jay's administrative team certainly does, a good job of looking at it and continuously evaluating it. And some of that evaluation is going to lead to changes. We try to do the measure of security that we think is appropriate for the scenario. Many times when the J is hosting special events, you will see a much larger presence, a much larger security presence. And as far as I'll just address a couple of those measures, but the Campus Security Patrol is actually made up of all former law enforcement officers, and they are an armed first responder. The patrol was put in place specifically for that reason, that the community, that the campus, the Millstone campus, did not have a first responder. And this may not mean a lot to many of you, but there's a uniqueness about where the campus sits, and that it sits in a piece of unincorporated St. Louis County. So many of our organizations sit within a municipality where the local police are very, very familiar with them, where they are continuously passing by them, doing patrols, that type of thing, and even working for us in terms of secondary work at our synagogues and our schools. But unincorporated St. Louis County is a little bit different because the officers may be spread out, thin to other unincorporated areas. That's one of the reasons why we put the campus patrol in place, was so that we would have a first responder. And we often put those officers in the J specifically assigned to that just because of the volume of traffic and because of the presence of individuals that we don't know on the campus and the lack of the ability to really shut the building down. Now, that doesn't mean that we're not going to potentially go there in the future, because there certainly have been conversations to that point. But right now, we're trying to basically walk that line where we're still someplace that people want to go, but still have a level of security provided. We use a lot of intelligence in the way that we monitor. We also try to exploit the fact that we have partners that are always also watching out for us, and we utilize heavily utilized training for those staff members so that they can recognize these situations before they become problematic. So we do have a number of layers in place, and we believe in a multi-layered approach. But I would say I wouldn't be surprised to see things change a little bit in the future with regards to maybe a more visible security presence. There's a presence there, but it's certainly not as visible maybe as some locations.
We have time for one more question.
Sorry for the long answer. It was a hard question to answer.
Yeah.
Thank you. Scott, you and I talked together a number of years ago after there was a shooting at a synagogue in Pittsburgh, where I used to live years ago, the Tree of Life. And such a nice community called Squirrel Hill, where we had no problems whatsoever, great delis, great neighborhood, everything else. And then all of a sudden the shooter comes in, and there was no real notice of anything like this that was going to happen. Is there a way that it's looked at as to how the congregation reacts afterwards? That is emotional trauma that stirs through the congregation, and what can be done in that way. As a mental health provider, I've seen a lot of people that continue to have trauma for years and years after that.
So was the question regarding sort of the potential aftermath and what resources might be available? Is that accurate?
Yes, it would be that, and also whether there's any way for the congregation to take note of what's happening after such violence and be self-protective after that.
Well, I think we absolutely have. I mean, we learn from every single scenario that's out there. We study them. I'm actually, the conference that I'm at right now, Brad Orsini, who was my counterpart in Pittsburgh, is here. I spoke to Brad a little earlier in the evening, and the new director, Sean Brokos, is here as well. And we learn from each other. We talk about these situations. We talk about what occurs in these situations, and it does require resources after the fact, and we're well aware of that. And we've had discussions with organizations within the community like JFS as to what resources could be available there, but also outside organizations as well. And we also exploit our relationships with our local, state, and federal partners in terms of resources that they might be able to bring to bear. So it's very important. I mean, we certainly need to do that. In terms of the organizations, learning from previous incidents, I think we learn from all of them. And some of the training that we do, or active attacker training, I actually bring up specific instances from each of those scenarios, not just from Tree of Life, but from the Chabad in Poway, California, from the attack on the JCC at Overland Park, from the attack on the synagogue in Halle, Germany, and on and on and on, including attacks in Monsey on a a rabbi's home there and a kosher deli in Jersey City. We look at each one of these attacks on our community and we try to learn from them, learn what things we can do, and then we actually incorporate those things into the training so that, you know, it's unfortunate, but that we may learn from previous instances so that we can do better in the future, better in mitigating threats and protecting our people.
Scott, we want to thank you very much for most informative discussion. I hope you can stay with us for the rest of this presentation.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Our next speaker has recently returned to St. Louis to become the regional director of the Anti-Defamation League Heartland chapter. The ADL is an active member of the JCRC Council and a trusted partner in our community efforts to fight anti-Semitism and the impact of extremism. Jordan Kadosh is the regional director of ADL Heartland, which serves Missouri, Southern Illinois, and Eastern Kansas. Before joining the ADL, Jordan worked in the textile recycling industry, where he most recently held positions of Vice President of Business Development at White House and Shapiro. Prior to his private sector career, Jordan spent a decade in Missouri politics as an organizer, manager, and consultant. He has just returned to St. Louis with his wife and son after 4 years in New Orleans and is enjoying being near family. He's here tonight to specifically discuss a legislative initiative spearheaded by ADL Heartland chapter to support additional funding for security for Jewish institutions. Jordan, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. I'm Jordan. I'm the new ADL director, and thank you. Better? I'm Jordan. I'm the new ADL director. Thank you so much for having me and for the kind introduction. And I just want to start with a quick thank you, not just to JCRC for the invitation and to Federation for hosting, but to Rory and Joel and Cheryl for being so welcoming and always kind to include me, and I really appreciate it. So thanks for having me. Real quick, for those of you who aren't familiar, ADL, we have a mission. It's stop the defamation of the Jewish people, secure justice and fair treatment to all. That's been our same mission since 1913. We've been around for over 100 years. And we execute our work through a network of 25 regional offices. ADL Heartland is one, and it's based here in St. Louis. And through our 3 research centers nationally, most recently, we opened a center on anti-Semitism research to coordinate peer-reviewed studies about anti-Semitism. We have a Center for Technology and Society that sits in Silicon Valley. Their most recent achievement was pulling down 15,000 white supremacist songs off of Spotify, the most popular music streaming app in the country, because they hold tech companies accountable to their own terms of service. And you might be most familiar with our work of our Center on Extremism. There are the research center who track militias and hateful ideologies and extremists in particular, and make sure that we can publish that information and give it to our federal, state, and local partners as needed. We execute this work through a network of 24 offices. What we do here is we investigate, we educate, and we advocate. We actively take in instance, much like Scott, to make sure that we can investigate incidents of anti-Semitism, bias. A lot of what we take in is protected speech, and we are able to investigate that and act accordingly. And if it is criminal in nature, we make a referral. That's not our job. So through our investigations and the incidents that we collect, we're able to audit those for anti-Semitic incidents. And we release that report once a year. Last year was the highest number of anti-Semitic incidents on record. We've been collecting data for 40 years. And so you're not imagining it. We all feel it. We can prove it. The incidents are a record high. And so why I was so excited to be invited tonight was to come and talk to you about one specific solution you heard earlier from Scott, that he uses the nonprofit security grant program to help secure our buildings. And that is a federal program under the Department of Homeland Security, commonly referred to as FEMA grants, because they are administered by FEMA and the application runs through them. And what ADL is proposing this coming legislative session, starting in January, is a state level program as well. It would be a new fund, a new pot of money with the same intent. It would be a separate program that would not require an extra application. But the same application that can be turned into FEMA would be able to be turned into the task force in charge of reviewing a state level application as well. That is the goal. If you're interested in the language, we can go through the nitty gritty, but my Civil Rights Committee just marked it up and I'll spare you all of the details. But yeah, I'm happy to take questions and just appreciate the council's support as I know JCRC is famed for its advocacy, and we hope we can rely on the rest of the community to help us advocate next year. And before I take any questions, I do want to say thank you to Morgan Moransky, who's been our representative on the council for 5 years now, for at least 5 years. So he comes to all the meetings and we're just happy to be a part of the council and looking forward to working together more often.
Oh, can I go first? Okay, okay. A meaningful quote that has become very relevant of late came from Eric Villard's book, The Order of the Day, and it goes, "Great catastrophes often creep up on us in tiny steps." And I feel like that's what's happening now. When a representative of a large company like Kentucky Fried Chicken, albeit in Europe, comes out with a stupid remark about having a Memorial Day meal feast for Kristallnacht, my personal fix is just to resolve that I can lead a perfectly happy life and never have fried chicken again. It's probably better for my health. Just like I don't need to eat Chick-fil-A and I don't need to shop at Hobby Lobby. When is it reasonable to worry that such a remark is taking insensitivity to the next level and as would be considered a potential threat to our people?
So you might notice that our organization ADL, not necessarily me, is on Twitter or in the press a lot, pushing back against remarks that we would all consider anti-Semitic. Over the past month, we've had a lot of coverage with popular entertainers and athletes, specifically making anti-Semitic remarks repeatedly, unapologetically sometimes. And so the appropriate response is to call it out and to do something about it. So we're all used to advocating in legislative arenas as we participate in our community, in our state, and we lobby our Congress people in this room and the people at this council meeting are very active in those endeavors. And what we did is we turned that apparatus on a corporate sponsor, on a business partner of Kanye West, who went out and made anti-Semitic remarks and unapologetically doubled down and tripled down over the course of several weeks. And we sent 18,000 letters to Adidas asking them to drop their business relationship. And ultimately they did. Last week on Thursday, we had the largest conference on anti-Semitism in the country, Never Is Now, in New York at the Javits Center. And the vice president of Adidas North America came to make his apologies in person, to make restitution, to announce a partnership that they were going to work with us to develop educational curriculums that can be used in student athletics programs and the other areas that they focus on, and really make a commitment to a long-term partnership to fight anti-Semitism now that they're free of the business relationship. And so that's what advocacy in action looks like these days. Unfortunately, sometimes you're going to get a little bit more traction by advocating to a corporation than you might to a government. But we go where the action is. And so, yeah, that's, I think, the appropriate response is to speak out and to continue to marginalize those views when they come up.
Okay. My question is really directed to the three of you who have given your presentations, and thank you. I'm wondering if there are any things that are specific to St. Louis that we ought to be concerned about. Are there things that are unique in our region that are not happening in other regions? And is there something that we need to be aware of or to do locally?
Oh, if somebody wants to talk about specific threats, it's not going to be me.
Hey, this is Jay with the FBI. So the question was, are there specific threats or are there specific environmental factors that we see here in St. Louis that are different from other communities where we need to be worried? And I will certainly pivot to Scott as well, who has a specific mandate within the community to provide some very directed protective services here as well to folks. But what I would say is there's not something specific. If we knew of a specific threat in St. Louis, first of all, we generally would not talk about it publicly unless it was a threat of unknown origin where we felt like we needed to put the entire community sort of on notice to really, we really mean if you see something, say something. So, that's what we would do with specific threat traffic. There is no specific threat facing St. Louis that we know of today as I stand here, facing the Jewish community or any other religious community, but we are always on high alert. And we are asking you to remain on high alert as well. And simply, this is a tough mandate every time I talk to religious communities, because by definition, religious communities want to be open, inviting places where people can study and learn and share ideas. And the idea of putting barriers up for security and making that more difficult for people to engage in is a tension that the community itself has to come to the right balance on. What I would ask is for you to, engage with Scott and get to the right balance here in the community for security versus your open freedoms in the community, so that you do have some protections while you engage in the freedoms that this wonderful country gives us. Does that answer your question? Okay, I'll pivot to Scott since he's online.
Sure. And thanks, Jay. Those are excellent comments. And I would say that, and Jordan mentioned it earlier when talking about some of the things that ADL does. We do monitor a significant amount of activity. Jordan and I talk very frequently about the things
Scott,
that
I'd like a break.
Can you hear me?
I said too often.
Yeah, unfortunately, too often. But we actually, communicate quite often regarding the possibility of threat. In other words, whether it be ideology, individuals engaged in, ideologies, that type of thing. We're, just like Jay said, if there was something specific, even if it was broad, but specific to a community, you would see something like what happened in New Jersey, where the FBI put out a notification on an alert about a potential attack or a potential threat to the Jewish community, in a broad manner. You would see that. You would see it come out of the St. Louis office. I'm sure Jay would concur that if there was something out there, they would not, even if it was under investigation, they're going to put out some level of notification to a community. If it's something specific that they're working on, they're going to be investigating to try to bring that to a place where they can interact and where they can engage. In terms of us, we're looking at everything. I'm not concerned about it reaching the level of criminality. I'm not concerned about it even reaching the level of an active threat. I've sent many things over to the Bureau and many things over to the Fusion Center that have not met the level of criminality, just as awareness pieces, things that come into our community. And then Jordan and I talk about those things frequently. So, we're really out there looking at everything that comes at us in terms of some level of communication. But in terms of threats that are unique to St. Louis, I'm going with Jay's answer. The threats that are out there are threats that are, maybe there are some that are unique to the Jewish community at large in every community, but they are threats that are threats to the Jewish community really nationwide, in some cases worldwide. So, there's nothing that's so unique to St. Louis that, we have like our own little, group or individual or someone that's just a threat to our community. I think it's more ideology and, and if there were specifics, we would address them.
And as far as what happens when we take an instance, if we receive a threat, I call 911, then I tell Scott and Jay in that
Yep.
order, and you should too. But when
Yep,
you're done,
absolutely.
Please report at adl.org. We do like to document things.
100%.
Jordan, thank you very much. The JCRC, as part of our mission, will be actively supporting that effort in Jefferson City come January. And thank you for the ADL leadership in that. I want to now turn the mic and the program over to JCRC Deputy Director Cheryl Edelstein, who is going to introduce the next speaker and topic.
Let's see. Okay. Good evening. I'm working between tech world and speaking world, so excuse me. The JCRC passed a racial equity policy, giving our lay leaders and staff the ability to engage in advocacy work and promote racial equity in our region. One of the first issues we engaged on was criminal justice reform, and we've been part of coalitions that have worked on legislative efforts on this topic since 2019. And I'm pleased to report that over this time, we have seen some moderate success. Our coalitions have always been led by a grassroots advocacy organization, Empower Missouri, and we owe a debt of gratitude to them for providing leadership not only on criminal justice reform, but also on food security, affordable housing, and so many other issues that relate to fighting poverty. Our topic tonight is about keeping our community safe, and I want to encourage us to think beyond our Jewish community to how we keep our entire community safe. As I often say when I testify on criminal justice reform bills, Jews have a deeply held belief in tshuva, loosely translated as changing, turning. In other words, the possibility of rehabilitation and redemption. As stated in Ezekiel, I have no pleasure in the death of the wicked, but that the wicked turn from his way and live. The JCRC reaffirms the biblical precept that people who offend are human beings, capable of reshaping their lives and worthy of an opportunity to repent and re-enter society. So we've added to our agenda tonight the introduction of one of our newest legislative priorities, Clean Slate expungement. Citizens returning from their prison terms face often insurmountable barriers to rebuilding their lives. Their ability to live safely and securely affects them, their families, and ultimately the entire community. With that as context, it's my pleasure to introduce Gwen Smith. Gwen Smith is a St. Louis native who joined Empower Missouri in June 2022 as the Criminal Justice Policy Manager. Over the past 8 years, she has worked in various capacities with justice-involved community members. Gwen has managed direct service and reentry housing programs, provided direct support to individuals incarcerated in jails and prisons, and led local efforts to coordinate reentry support services. She has a BS in criminology and criminal justice from UM St. Louis and an MSW from Washington University. Gwen is leading Empower Missouri's efforts to pass Clean Slate expungement in the Missouri General Assembly, and she is here tonight to introduce us to the benefits and impacts of this proposal. Gwen?
Cheryl, thank you so much for your introduction, and thank you so much for having me speak tonight. I am really excited to share information about Clean Slate with everybody this evening. Can everybody hear me okay? Is audio all right? All right. And are you guys seeing the PowerPoint screen? Okay, great. So Clean Slate is a national campaign. Clean Slate legislation has been passed now in 8 other states, and we believe that it is time to pass similar legislation here in Missouri. Clean Slate legislation is about automatic expungement, so record sealing for folks that are eligible and have served their sentence and then had a period of waiting post-sentencing, would receive, I'll get into kind of some of the specifics about our current process, what is not working so well in the current process, some of the consequences that we see of somebody having a criminal record, and then I'll go into some of the details on the current Clean Slate policy proposal that we have on the table that we are hoping to pass in the 23 legislative session. So just some kind of context to ground our conversation. So Missouri has the 7th highest incarceration rate in the country. Nearly 2 million Missourians have criminal records. So we're talking about a lot of folks in our state that would potentially be impacted, and more than $725 million is spent annually on correction costs. And we actually have relatively expansive eligibility under our current expungement process. We have what's called a petition-based process, which means that you need to be aware that you qualify for expungement, and then go through the process of filing paperwork, showing up to court, retaining an attorney. There are many, many steps. It takes a pretty long time for someone to successfully get their record sealed. And these are just the consequences of a criminal record. These are things that go beyond what folks might think about. So we're looking at, limitations in housing options. It undermines family stability, can decrease earning potential throughout somebody's entire life. And I'll get more into those collateral consequences in a second. This is slightly unorganized in that slide was out of order. But our current expungement process is costly, it's time consuming, and it's very confusing. So when I mentioned that it has some good stuff going for it, we have a relatively large number of offenses that are currently eligible for expungement. The majority of nonviolent felonies are eligible for expungement, as well as the majority of misdemeanors. But because the process is very cumbersome, very inaccessible and expensive, time consuming, the folks that need it the most are just not accessing it. Over 500,000 folks in Missouri have convictions currently that are eligible for expungement under our current expungement law. But as we'll see, not all of those folks are able to access it. This is one of the reasons why the average expungement in Missouri costs $500. That is money that not everybody easily has access to, along with the time out of someone's schedule associated with trying to clear a record. And this is really if you take away one statistic about our current expungement process, I hope that it's that currently to date, less than 1% of the over 500,000 individuals that are eligible for expungement in Missouri have actually successfully obtained expungement. And again, that's because our process, I've talked to attorneys that, help folks through the petition-based process, and attorneys say that, the process is clear as mud. It is, I think, maybe intentionally pretty confusing and certainly difficult for most folks to navigate. So at the current rate that expungements are being processed by the state, if we continued at that rate, it would take 1,000 years to clear the expungement backlog. Clearly, that's not acceptable. So that's where Clean Slate legislation comes in as a way to open up the expungement process, make it accessible, and have it have the original impact of the law, because we do have that eligibility on the books now, and we believe that should be something that's accessible for everyone that qualifies. So these are just some examples of the collateral consequences of a criminal record. We know that there's profound impacts in folks' lives from having a record, both in education and employment and housing and in family impact. So when it comes to job seeking, folks that have a criminal record are only half as likely as other job seekers to get a call back from a potential employer, making it very difficult for folks to find gainful employment. And there's nearly 50,000 state and federal regulatory restrictions that limit individuals with a record. These are policies that restrict certain types of employment, occupational licensing, housing, other public benefits. In Missouri, you cannot serve on a jury, for example. There are things that impact someone's ability to be a foster parent or to even chaperone on their kids' field trips. So there's a lot of policies that continue to restrict folks' freedom well after they have served their time or served their sentence of probation and paid that debt to the community. Background checks are a very common tool. It's used by 2/3 of colleges, 87% of employers, and 80% of landlords. And that is something that makes accessing all of those very difficult for folks with a record. So when we're talking about the loss to Missouri's economy from the annual earnings lost for folks with clearable convictions, we're talking about an annual loss of $2.6 billion in wages that could be higher if folks with clearable convictions were able to access those and get into a higher bracket in the job market. Nationally, we're talking about $78 to $87 billion per year in lost GDP from folks being shut out of the labor market due to arrest and conviction records. So the economic impact really can't be understated here. And the family impact is huge. This is, when someone has that scarlet letter of a criminal record, it certainly does not only impact them, but their whole family. Nearly 50% of US children have at least one parent with a criminal record. And this is a quote from Fran Marion, who is one of our Clean Slate ambassadors in Missouri. I'm going to drop a link in the chat for a really great short 3-minute video. If I have time at the end of this presentation, I will share it, but I think we might be a little bit time crunched, so I would urge you to watch it on your own. Fran, along with 2 other folks, are interviewed about the potential impact of Clean Slate and why we need it. This is a quote from Fran. She said, "My kids are doing a life sentence with me because it affects me keeping a roof over their head. I can meet every criteria for a job, but you see that felony and it's over with." So what is the impact of Clean Slate? What have we seen in states that have passed this? Oh, thank you, Jennifer, for sharing in the chat. She shared the video link there. So Clean Slate legislation would provide fairness, safety, and second chances to Missouri. In states that have passed Clean Slate legislation, we're seeing that 1 year after a record has been cleared, people are 11% more likely to be employed. And the wages of, this is also in a 1-year post record clearance time period, wages increase by more than 20%. And then this is really important when we're talking about public safety. I think, for a lot of folks, they hear about Clean Slate and they might have public safety concerns. But what we find with expungement relief is that it allows folks to re-enter in society and to not face those obstacles that they were held back with a criminal conviction. And so it actually decreases the chance of someone reoffending. We see that 5 years after expungement, individuals that received an expungement were actually less likely than members of the general public to be convicted of a crime. So what does our current Clean Slate proposal look like? So we have a pretty robust campaign of a lot of stakeholders from around the state. It's a very bipartisan effort. We have a very diverse group. We've got faith leaders, including JCRC at the table. We have a lot of direct service organizations. We have a lot of folks that have involvement in the criminal justice system. And we're all kind of have been coming together for some time now, talking about, what this proposal will look like in Missouri, what the best fit is for us in our state, because every Clean Slate legislation, in different states has been different to kind of fit that state's needs. So we do have a policy proposal draft. We do have our sponsors. Republican sponsors secured in both the House and the Senate, which is very exciting. We've got really great sponsors. And so we are very excited about seeing how far we can get this in 2023. I'm going to lay out some of just the kind of top level, most important details of our policy. And just with the caveat that changes are normal and expected in this process. So this is probably not exactly what the final version that gets voted on will look like. But some aspects of this will certainly be in the final version, including the definition of expungement, which in Missouri, when we're talking about expungement, we are talking about record sealing as opposed to record clearing, which is where the record is destroyed. When the record is sealed from public view, that record does still exist and can be accessible by law enforcement. So we are not seeking to add any new offenses to the list of eligible offenses. We are, as I said, we've got a pretty expansive list currently, and would not seek to expand that at this time. So the process when we're talking about automatic expungements, the state is responsible for processing those automatic expungements, notifying folks that their record has been expunged, and updating records monthly. So a lot of this responsibility, if this bill is passed, would be on the state. Eligibility, we're talking about any offense that's currently eligible under Missouri law, and that somebody has met that waiting period. The waiting period is a little bit different depending on if it's a misdemeanor or a felony or an infraction. Those waiting periods vary accordingly. Reporting requirements. So we're talking about 3 years after the law goes into effect. Annual reports to the judiciary committees of both the Senate and the House would be required to ensure that the policy is being followed accurately. Fines and fees, we are proposing that they do not need to be paid in advance of expungement. They would still need to be paid, but not necessarily as a prerequisite for expungement. A lot of times someone has outstanding court fines and fees because they're living in poverty and are not able to make those payments. Unpaid restitution in relation to an offense would have to be paid. And then another big barrier is these lifetime limits. So current expungement fees cost about $500 per expungement. So pretty debilitating. And the last thing to note here, so the lifetime limits are currently 1 felony and 2 misdemeanors. We're looking to increase that to 3 felonies and 5 misdemeanors because we know that 1 felony really blocks a lot of people from being eligible. That's not what a lot of folks' criminal record looks like. And if we pass it, the state will have 2 years to put these proposed changes into effect. So I will drop some ways to get involved in the chat. And I will stop screen sharing now. And if anybody has a final question, we might have time for it.
Do we have one question in the room? Lou?
Let's say you're assuming success of your program, how does it work to the potential employer? They just or the potential employee, when they fill out an application, do they not have to put down anything on the question, have you been convicted of a felony?
Yes, that is correct. If someone's record has been expunged in Missouri, they do not have to answer that question. There are still, obviously certain professional barriers, occupations that folks would not be eligible for depending on certain offense types, things that really make sense. So in the chat, I'm putting our campaign website. It's mocleanslate.org. You can sign up there to get our newsletter and get more information, get connected. I'm also putting my email in the chat if anybody would like to just reach out personally and learn more. A great way to get involved is to sign up as an organizational partner which JCRC currently is, but if you represent an organization or a business that wants to support Clean Slate, we are really looking for additional organizational partners. This bill is very likely to be talked about in this legislative session. It will be pre-filed in December. We have two really prominent Republicans in the House and Senate as sponsors, and we'll be having a press release about that soon.
Gwen, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
As part of our advocacy program, we will be working with members of the community to talk about the benefits of Clean Slate expungement. And we'll probably see you in Jefferson City as the session begins. I want to thank all of our speakers tonight, Jay, Scott, Jordan, and Gwen, for being with us. Another round of applause for each of them, please. Thank you. And to thank you here, as well as those joining us via Zoom who have spent the last hour and a half with us. We greatly appreciate it. To close our meeting, I have a closing remarks from Rory.
Just keeping you one last minute, I just want to echo Joel's words of thanks to all of our speakers for being here, and not just for sharing all that you do, but for all that you do. I think our community recognizes the enormous importance of your work and is deeply grateful to all of you for it. I want to also say that obviously security is one of our utmost concerns. And part of this work is not only how do we stay secure as a community, but how do we stay vibrant as a community. And so I just want to put in a quick plug for those of you who have not been following up on some of the emails JCRC and Federation have both been sending out. We're incredibly excited that this week we've launched a partnership in the works for quite some time called Courageous Communities. And I want to tie it back to where I started us off, to really look at the ways in which we become stronger, not just through protection, although I'm not going to minimize that, it's necessary, but also becoming stronger through our diversity, through engaging with one another, through our difference, and through really grappling with some of the big questions that constantly face our community. So we were privileged this week to host Yehuda Kurtzer from the Shalom Hartman Institute, who led a really fabulous session to kick us off. And then starting in January, we are going to be doing 2 cohorts, a rabbinic cohort, and then a cohort of professional and lay leaders to do some deeper dive and study. But all of that will be accompanied by a series of community programs as well. So I invite you to stay clued in on all of those, because if there's one thing that I'm taking from every one of our speakers tonight, it's that we can only do all of this if we do it together. Everybody who is here on this podium or here on this screen is important to the process, but is only one piece. Unless the rest of us all get involved, then none of it really can move forward. So I invite you to join us and to be part of it. Thank you again for coming out tonight. And am I closing this out, Joel, or are you going to close? Well, I'll just close us out by saying thank you. And a quick reminder that our next council meeting will be Monday, January the 9th. So thank you all. Anyone who's in this room, are some snacks, and I know some of our speakers here are happy to continue to chat with you. And for those of you on the screen, thank you for zooming in. Have a good night, everybody.